Hey guys, Logan here from Pop Wood. So in the last video, I talked about this Crescent bandsaw and kind of the overview on it and why I picked it up and kind of the reasons behind it and kind of a general playing field on some of the features of it, some of the things that make this bandsaw unique compared to a more modern one. So in this video, I figured we would tackle getting this back into fighting shape. So the first thing we're going to do is get at least the top wheel off. And I'm going to replace the rubber that is dry rotted on there with some modern urethane wheels. If you watched the last video, I talked about how there's kind of this cosmoline all over everything. It's just this super sticky, nasty stuff to keep rust away. And I'm sticking gloves on because I got cuts all over my hands, so I'd rather not get that all over. So now this wheel just is going to slide right off. And honestly, the weight of this wheel for being steel is, I don't know, maybe 20 pounds. It's pretty lightweight. So you can see the rubber's already falling off. So let's go ahead and step over to the bench and we're gonna look at these tires and get the new urethane ones put back on. Okay, now I've already cut this rubber wheel off of this, or the rubber tire off this wheel. It was starting to sag a little bit, I think just from sitting in the same position for 70 years. And it's starting to, I mean, it's just falling off at this point. So there's two different style of wheels or tires that can go on bandsaw wheels. You have the potential for a rubber tire, which is what this old one was. And these need glued on. So a lot of this junk that you see on these edges still, I think is probably just old contact cement or rubber cement, something. Might be asbestos, probably not, but you know, it's some form of glue. And we need to get that off first. And then we can put a new tire on. The new tires that I'm gonna put on are these guys. And these are urethane tires. So these are a more modern tire. The ones for this 36-inch bandsaw for the pair of tires were $202, so about $100 a piece. They're a pretty big tire. I think standard bandsaw size tires are just 20 or 30 bucks. But they're a good upgrade. Now, the one thing that you need to look for is whether or not your tire already has a crown in it, because once the tire is applied to the wheel, we want a little bit of a dome in that center, and that's going to allow us to track the blade. Now, with older bandsaws and modern ones, but anything that has a nice steel tire, most of the time these will be crowned. So by sticking a straight edge across here, we can see that there is just a very, very slight crown in the center. So there's a very slight crown in this, which means I can use the urethane tires. Now, if there was no crown and this was a flat tire or a flat wheel, I would put rubber tires back on. They would need glued on. And then after it was installed in the bandsaw, I would actually spin the tire and use a piece of sandpaper or a sanding block to actually slightly dome over that tire as it's applied to the wheel. But in this instance, these are domed. All we have to do is stretch that new tire on. But first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna grab a wire brush and a drill, and we're gonna remove some of this built-up adhesive. So this might take a while. Okay, I've got the wheel pretty much cleaned off. What I'm doing here is really concentrating on the ridges. This is a grooved surface. So it's kind of like it's been milled with teeth in it. And that leaves grooves for the adhesive. Really what I'm trying to clear off is the top of those grooves. I don't really care if there's adhesive stuck in the bottom. So I actually switched over to an angle grinder with a wire brush because it's a little bit more aggressive than that drill one. The drill wire brush was kind of a waste of money in my opinion. But I've cleaned it off pretty well. And now I've went over the top with some naphtha. And the naphtha really eats away that adhesive and it clears up any remaining cosmoline. There's a lot of cosmoline around this hub and it cleared that up pretty well. So now at this point, we can go ahead and start soaking these urethane tires. Now the urethane's stretchy, but it will stretch over these wheels a little bit easier if we soak it in hot water with just a little bit of dish soap. It's gonna soften them enough that we can kind of stretch and mangle these around. So I'll get those soaking here in a minute. But what I'm gonna do first is we're gonna use one of these guys just to see. And this is a lead checker. Now this is just one I ordered off Amazon. They're pretty cheap. I think it was probably $7 or $8 for this, and there's 10 swabs in here. These swabs are meant to grab it and you just wet the tip in water, and then you want to find good clean paint and you want to rub it, and you want to just rub it for 30 seconds. And what you're looking for is to see if the swab turns a red color, and if it turns a red color, that indicates the presence of lead. Okay, and I would say that is turning reddish orange. Now I've been wiping this down with naphtha, so I'm sure that I've removed a lot of that surface material. But that is definitely an indication of lead. So as I'm using the grinder, making sure I have a mask on. I'm not removing paint necessarily, but in case anything does get into the air, I'm not breathing it in. Same way when I go to work on the body of the bandsaw, as I'm using a brush to remove some of those loose chips of paint, make sure I have a respirator on, make sure the dogs aren't out here, my kids aren't trying to eat the paint chips, stuff like that. So we just want to make sure we're taking precautions. So that's a positive lead result. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step over to the sink and put these in as hot of water as my water heater will give us in the shop. I'm going to let these soak for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to start stretching this over here. I'm going to do that with a couple of clamps and a couple of dowels to help me roll it around the outside. There we go. Okay. I'm not sweating, you're sweating. All right. So now that I have this tire over the hub or over the wheel, I need to center up because I'm okay in some areas. Some areas I'm a little off. I can kind of squeeze it just to get it centered. Yeah, that'll work. And then I need to get these dowels out. Do it without pinching my fingers. And if you can, or if you need to, you can actually roll these dowels and it will kind of walk the band a little bit. But, psh, works fantastic. Okay. There we go. Got new rubbers on our tire. So now I need to do the same thing to that bottom tire. However, that bottom tire is held on with a spline and a couple set screws. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hook up the motor first, get that bottom tire spinning. That way I can power spin it as I'm using my wire brush on it. I think that's going to work a little bit better. So let's go ahead and step around to look at the planer, and I'm going to show you the setup that I'm going to use for this bandsaw because I already have it set up on my planer. All right, to get power to this bandsaw, we need to figure out how to supply three-phase power in a shop that only has single phase. Now, in layman's terms, and I'm a layman, so that's how I'm going to explain it, power is available in single phase or three phase. Generally, you only have three phase available to you if you're in an industrial location or here in Iowa, if you are on a farm. A lot of times farm equipment will run off of three-phase power. But it's not standard for most residential operations, nor is it available here where our shop is, or it'd be really expensive. So we have to figure out how to supply three-phase power. Now there's really a couple of options on how to do that. One of the most common will be something called a rotary phase converter. That's actually a separate motor that will run and supply a third phase of power to whatever machine it is. The other way to do it is something like this guy. This is a VFD, a variable frequency drive. Now, in essence, power is supplied in a cycle, okay? So let's just say a complete energy cycle takes 1 second. With three-phase power, there are 3 different powers that are supplied within that 1 second interval, evenly spaced out, more or less. I know there's some electrical engineers that will tell me how I'm wrong. In essence, that's what it's doing. This VFD artificially supplies 3-phase power using a single phase input, okay? So this VFD I have set up to run my planer, okay? My planer here uses 5-horse 3-phase motor. So what I'm doing is I have this VFD plugged into 220 volt single phase. It's on a 20 amp circuit, and it is pulling that 220 in to the VFD. I have this VFD programmed to match this motor, and then I am supplying an outlet down here. That outlet matches up to my planer, and then when I have it plugged in, I can then turn my planer on and off with this VFD. Now, I could probably run a remote switch over here to my planer so I could have controls on the planer, but because I'm only 2 feet away, not that big a deal. I just start it here, stop it here. Now, there are some benefits to having a VFD versus something like a rotary phase converter. With a VFD, we can program certain parameters, such as a spin up and a spin down time, or an acceleration and deceleration time. And that's important, especially for something like a bandsaw, because those are such big wheels and they're so well balanced. If you shut the power off, that blade could be spinning for 10, 15, or even 20 minutes after you power it down. But with a VFD, you can actually program a deceleration time. So we can tell the VFD that we want that motor to start over a 10-second period. And then when we stop the motor, or hit the stop button to stop the bandsaw, we want it to take 10 seconds, and then it will basically reverse the motor to slow itself down. So this is the basic setup that we're going to use over at the bandsaw. So I'm going to go ahead and mount the VFD, install an outlet, and then we'll go ahead and talk about wiring up the motor. Okay, so our electrician just stepped out to grab a couple of things to finish tidying up everything down here, the connections between the VFD, the power cord, and the outlet. But I want to quick talk about what's going on here. Much like my planer, this is going to be running this outlet down here off the VFD. The VFD is getting power from behind me on a standard 220 outlet. And this VFD, as you can see, is much smaller than the one for the planer. That's an important distinction. The VFD has to be sized for the motor. Now, a motor, obviously, in the States here, we call them 1 horse, 2 horse, 3 horse. They could be a kilowatt motor in Europe. But these are also sold as horsepower rated VFDs. And you want one that is sized for at least the size of your motor. And the rule of thumb that I have been told is to size it up by 1.5 times. So if you have a 5-horse motor, you would want at least a 7.5 horse VFD to handle that 3-phase conversion. So this here is a 3-horse motor. This is a 5-horse VFD. It's a much smaller size than that 7.5 horse one that I have on my 5-horse planer, but it is a little bit smaller, basic same principle though. So now what we need to do is get the motor connected to a pigtail to plug in to this outlet. And one thing about motors from an industrial standpoint, a lot of times they'll be dual voltage. They'll either be able to run off of 220 or 240 or 480 volts. Some of them might even be higher than that. And the motor plate generally will tell you the configuration of the wires inside of that electrical box. You'll see a high voltage and a low voltage reading. And those lines will be connected with numbers. So 1, 7, and 9 may be connected with a line. That means 1, 7, and 9 wires need pigtailed together. Same way with any other numbers that are connected on that wiring diagram. Now, with an older motor like this, they actually have brass number tags wrapped around each wire, which is really, really nice. Some newer motors, I think my planer, which is a early 80s planer, actually has a paper tag around it. So they can kind of disintegrate. You kind of keep an eye on them. If you can read the number, it doesn't hurt to make another tag and wrap it around there just so you know for future. But we'll go ahead and get this hooked up. And then I will go ahead and walk you through the programming because as I mentioned, we have to program this a little bit to be able to run this bandsaw. So we'll check back in a few minutes after the electrician's done with this power cable, and then we'll go from there. Okay, the one thing to remember about VFDs is they do need program. Now, you can probably find a local company around you that will help you program your VFD, but it's gonna be much more expensive than if you just buy one. I've got this guy, it's a Mullum brand, it's not sponsored, I just bought it on Amazon. It was the cheapest one I could find on Amazon. But the reason I bought it was that the reviews said the company was super helpful in getting the parameter settings. So the one I bought for the planer, I simply took a picture of the motor plate, sent it through the Amazon message system to the seller, and within 15 or 20 minutes, even though they're in China, they sent me back an entire list of parameters for that motor. And I did the same thing with this one. So that's what I have up here. And there's a bunch of settings. The manual that comes with these has a list of several hundred settings you can change. Most of them, I don't know what they do. But for this motor plate, I have a set of maybe 12 different parameters I need to set. So we're going to do that now. So the first thing I need to do is I need to program FP01, and that needs to be set to setting number 2. And enter. And that resets this back to factory, okay, just in case anything got changed. Now we need to change F102 to 220. That is the rated voltage of this motor. So that is F1, F1, 02, 220, okay? F103 is the current, and that is 12. F105 is the speed of the motor, and this motor is rated for 570 RPM. Okay, and then I'm just going to go through the rest of these real quick. Okay, I went ahead and filled up that top oil cap with oil for that top wheel. It's going to take more than what I have in that little 3-in-1, so I'm going to have to grab some lightweight motor oil to kind of get that filled up. I don't really know how much oil it's going to take, but we want to make sure those bearings obviously have oil in them. But now, motor's hooked up to a pigtail. It's plugged into the outlet. I've programmed everything. Let's see if this thing starts. I'm going to stay on this side of the saw. That's fantastic. That thing is running so smooth. Now this is a fairly fast saw. What I mean by that is the different bandsaw sizes will have a different feet per minute that the blade is traveling. So a smaller bandsaw like the Powermatic back behind me, that one's gonna be about a 2,500 to 3,000 feet per minute blade speed. The calculations on this one put the blade speed at about 5,600 feet per minute. So she's gonna fly. But this old cast iron, there's no vibration on this. This is fantastic. So now what I need to do is I do need to go ahead and clean off that lower wheel like we did the top wheel. And because I have the power of the motor behind it, I'm just gonna go and grab a wire brush and hold it on there and let it clean itself off. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and shut that down. Let's go ahead and see what the slowdown time is on this. Now it's worth noting that I left the original start and stop switch on this bandsaw. It's a magnetic start stop switch. It does require large voltage going to it to actually start the motor. With this VFD, I do have the option to run a remote switch, which is what I'm going to do. So there's gonna be a separate box. I'll probably mount it right above that original box, so the start and stop button will be within reach of the operator, not having to walk around the backside of the saw. But that slows down pretty well with that VFD, especially I think once we put a blade on there and we have the friction between the two wheels and that blade in place. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull that other tire out of the sink, and let's see if we can get it stretched on there. All right, I'm only laughing because everybody cleared the area because I've got a blade in this bad boy. We're rubbing a little bit here on these cool guides. I'm not terribly concerned about that. I do want to order a little bit shorter of a blade because I think I ordered this the size that the catalog says from 1955. And I think it should be about 2 inches shorter, maybe 3 inches shorter on the length. I think we're ready to turn it on with a blade in. So I'm gonna shut all these doors, put my safety glasses on, and I'm starting up behind it. Godspeed. Fire in the hole. It's up to speed. Let's cut something. Oh, she's so smooth. All right, that feels really good. I've had this bandsaw in the shop now for several months, and it's just been sitting here. She's up and running. What can I say? It just puts a smile on my face. So there's a couple things I want to do. Need to order a little bit shorter blade. I am going to order a wider blade and a carbide tipped version at that for resawing, because this is going to be my resaw bandsaw. And I definitely want to get a hold of a few of these Zephyr guides, get some new fresh ones in there, and maybe get some new versions of the rub pads to maybe help with some of the noise. And I definitely want to fine tune some of those blade guide settings before I start doing some real heavy work on it. But I think that wraps it up for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and keep a lookout for the next video here in the new shop. We'll see you guys.